Hello and welcome. In this video I'm covering managing a database with Python, Pandas and SQL. In specific, we are taking a look at updating an SQL database. So as you see on this slide, you once pulled data and stored it in a database. Now there's new data. How do you update the database? There are different approaches to solve this problem. The easy way would be to just pull the whole dataset newly, overwrite everything and just store it in the database again. This would be a solution indeed, but it is very bad because it is both inefficient and also you will sooner or later run into the problem that you are hitting API limits when doing that on a slightly larger scale. The hard way would be to pull only new data which is not yet stored in the database. That would be very good and efficient, and you will at least most probably not run into the problem of hitting API limits. And that's exactly what we are going to do in this video, both for daily stock price data, but also for intraday cryptocurrency data using the Binance API. Alright, let's get started. We need some libraries. Pandas for data handling, Create Engine from sqlalchemy to connect to SQL, and Finance as our data source. So I'm working with stock price data here. Next, we are going to set up an engine using the just imported create engine function and connect to SQLite and give the database a name. I'm just calling that test DB here. Just as a side note, I recommend and I encourage you to work with other database management systems. I'm using SQLite here because it's the easiest to use, but of course, be invited to use your preferred database management system, such as MySQL, Postgres, or whatever you are preferring. Next, let's pull some data, storing that in a variable df. So we are pulling stock price data for Apple, and we're just starting in the beginning of this year. And now we go until some days ago. So let's say we are starting in the beginning of November. 11. And with that, we are getting open, high, low, close data for Apple, starting here and going until the end of October. All right. And we want to import this data frame to our SQL database. So we can easily do that using toSQL, give the table a name. I'm just calling it as the symbol name, so Apple, and provide the engine so that Pandas knows where to write this data frame to. So this will create a table Apple in our test DB. Let's execute that. And as the table has been created, I can use Pandas read SQL function here, provide the table name and the engine, and I'm reading out data for the Apple table from our SQL database, right? So this is the data stored in the database currently. Now, to check if you are pulling new data, so let's say you are going, I don't know, some days in the future, you have new data. And forget about this line for now. And if you pull the data from Apple, it is still going until October, right? But your data frame you pulled, it is going until the 4th of November. But it's also containing all the dates you already stored in your database. And what you could do, and what is also a way, is to just store that somewhere in like database data frame, and then screen this data frame and exclude all the dates from this data frame which are included in your database. You can do that, and if you're interested in the syntax, it's pretty much straightforward. You are just screening the index of this data frame and see only those dates which are not included in this date column here, right? But I want to explain you why I wouldn't do that. So the problem with that is, if you do that, you always have to pull all rows from your database. And imagine you have millions of rows, so which honestly wouldn't happen if you have daily data. But imagine you have very granular 1 minute intraday data or any other form of data. You would just need to pull out every single row from the database, and that's not efficient. We want to find an efficient way to do that. So The recommended way to do that is to pull the maximum date from the database table, so from the table Apple. And you can do that by using read SQL and just provide select maximum date, max date from Apple. And with that, you are getting the end of October, right? And then this is currently in a data frame format, so you have to do some indexing. So take a look at the values and then screen for the element and then screen for the date. So you're getting a date in a string format like this. And with that, you have a maximum date from the database. All right. And you can use this max date now and just screen your poll data. So df, which is including new data now, and you are just screening the new data, so the index here, which are the dates, which are larger than the max date. And with that, you're getting only the rows which are not included yet in your database, right? And you can use this table now, use to_SQL again, provide the table name, the engine, and then provide if exists, you want to append. And with that, you've updated your database. So if you pull data again, Apple, you will see that you have successfully updated the database. So let's wrap that all in a function which is doing all that stuff for us to make it flexible and maybe to also create more tables. So for now, let's just do all the steps and wrap them up in a function. So let's call that SQL importer. And this is taking data, which is new data, and a certain table name. Now, first of all, we want to pull the max date. So I'm just going to copy paste that from here. And this should select the max date from a given table, right? So I'm using an F string here. Instead of only pulling Apple, I'm pulling the provided table name here. So we have the max date and we want to print out the max date as a feedback when calling this function. Next, I want to have my new rows, and my new rows are the provided data. And then I'm simply doing what I did here, right? Only those which are larger than the max date. So I can just copy paste that and change data, add df to data, sorry. Right, with that I have only new rows, and then I'm picking new rows to SQL, provide the table name, which is the provided table name here, the engine, and if exists, I want to append. And finally, I just want to have a feedback how many rows have been imported. I think that's quite informative, so I can just take a look at the length of the new rows and then do a typecast to a string, so I can add some text after that. And then I just take rows imported to database, or new rows rather, new rows imported to database. Right? So let's call this function and see what it does. So let's just take our data frame and our table now. And remember, our table is already updated with the newest data, right? So let's see what is happening if we are doing that. You see 0 new rows have been imported to the database, and our max date is the 4th of November before we are importing. Now let's just pull new data and just move on into the future, 11th here, right? So not in the future from today on, but from the past on, right? So you are at a new date now and have new data, right? So for now, you see we're getting data until the 10th of November. So we have new data here, 1, 2, 3, 4 new rows. And now let's call this function again. And you see 4 new rows have been imported to the database. And if I'm executing that again, I will also see my newest maximum date. And I get the feedback that 0 new rows have been imported to the database. Pretty cool until now, right? But I want to extend this function because currently we are just feeding in data we pull manually, right? I want to integrate the data pull into this function, right? I want to pull the maximum date from a given table and then only pull data from this date on to avoid unnecessary API calls or hammering API limits here, right? So I want to make this even more flexible and even more useful. So to do that, I'm changing, first of all, the parameter here. I'm just taking a certain symbol. And this part has to be changed here. After pulling a maximum date, I want to pull new data from this date on. So I create new data here, then use YF_download for the provided symbol. And the start is my maximum date. And I'm doing a datetime transformation here. Otherwise it won't work with YFinance here. So I'm just pulling data from the max date on. I also have to change this here to symbol, by the way, because now my input or my argument for this function is symbol and not table anymore. Now I would keep this row, and I strongly recommend to keep this row, and I explain you why. Even though you pull data from the max date on, the max date is always included, right? So let me just show you. Let's just download it for Apple. And our current max date, what was our value? End of October. So if I'm doing that, so by the way, this is an old value. I defined it somewhere above here, right? So this is not the newest max date, just to avoid confusions here. So you see, what I wanted to tell you is you see that the max date is included here, right? But this row is already existent in your current database. So I would always add this check that you have the index and screen for those rows which are larger than the max date. With that, you would exclude this row here. Okay? So you have to do some amendments here. So new data instead of data. And with that, you have included the data pull into this function. This one you have to change as well. So the table name is the provided symbol. And with that, let's execute that. And with that, let's try it out for Apple. And as we didn't define an end date here in the YF_download function, we would just get the most recent date. So data from last Friday, right? So the 11th. So if we are executing that only for Apple, everything is done for us. So you will see one new row imported to the database. So the new maximum date is the 11th here, right? So very nice. We didn't hammer the API. We were just pulling data from the max date of our database on, right? But we could even improve that, because I also want to provide other symbols here. And if those tables are not existent in our database, they should be created. So let's say we want to do that for Tesla. If I'm executing that, it will run into an error because Tesla has no max date, because the table Tesla does not exist in our database. So let's extend this function. And to do that, I'm working with a try and except statement here. So I'm just trying this. So if I don't have a max date, the table isn't existent. So if I don't have a max date, I want to create a table. So I can do that in except. So if I have no max date, I want to pull new data using YF_download for the symbol. And now I have to provide a certain starting date. So yeah, you have to decide when do you start to analyze your data. So I was pulling, I think, from the beginning of this year on. So I'm just setting the default start value as a function argument. So you can change that and then set it to the first date of this year here. right? So I just say, okay, just give me new data starting at 2022. And then I simply take the new data and write that to SQL, give a table the symbol name, and provide the engine. And I also want to have feedback here. New table created for symbol with, and then I also want to have the rows which have been created here, just as an interesting thing to know, which is just the length of the new data frame, and then rows. So how does this work? Let's execute that. And now let's actually execute that for Tesla. If I'm doing that, you see new table created for Tesla with 219 rows. And if I'm executing that again now, 0 new rows imported to database because I already have the updated rows here. But if I'm executing that tomorrow, this will import the new row for Tesla and is only pulling the newest row for Tesla. So quite insanely cool, right? So you can even, just to give you an idea, you can even, let's get rid of all this stuff here. You could create a stocks list here, stocks, Google, Tesla, I don't know, 3M, Apple, and then you can just take for stock in stocks and call our SQL importer and then populate your database, and you would get new table created for Google, no new rows for Tesla, a new table created for 3M, 0 new rows for Apple, and so on. So insanely useful, insanely cool. Yeah, play around with that. Now, as I said in the beginning, let's do that for cryptocurrency data. You have to do some amendments here, but the logic from this is essentially the same. So you can try it for yourself. Do that for intraday cryptocurrency data. Slightly more challenging, but let's do it here. So I'm importing the Binance client here to pull price data from Binance. And I'm using a function which I've used in many of my previous videos. This is pulling intraday cryptocurrency data on the 1 minute time frame. So how would this look like if I'm pulling that for Bitcoin? Let's take today here. So you will see that you're getting 1 minute granular price data, open, high, low, close data for Bitcoin here, right? And now we want to do the exact same thing as we just did, right? So I'm creating a function for that. But before doing so, I want to import this table for now. So just as a side note, I won't include creating new tables here. So you can do that for yourself. So as I did in the stock importer function, right? You can, the logic is the same. So I just create a table for now. So to not waste all of our time, I will just import that to SQL, name the table Bitcoin USDT, provide the engine, and that's it, right? So I have a table in my database now, Bitcoin USDT going until 12:55 here, right? And now I'm creating this function, calling that crypto SQL updater updater. This taking a certain symbol, or rather coin, and then it is essentially very similar with some exceptions here. So I'm going to copy paste some stuff, basically everything here. So we have a max date, pulling our max date from our current table. Then we have we have to exclude this YF download, of course. Then have to change the max date here because the column is slightly different. I'll show you what I mean if I'm reading in Bitcoin USDT. This is a time column, so we have to pull the max time from the symbol. Can also call that max time now, but I'm keeping it max date. So the new data now is my get data function, right? So get data for that symbol, and then I want to pull only from the max date on using this function. And then this stays the same, right? I want to only filter for those rows which are larger than the max date. And here I would recommend to do one thing. I would exclude the last row, and I'm going to explain you why I would do this. So if I'm pulling, or if I'm calling that function here, this is the real time. So this is changing, right? This is if I call that again. So just remember this value 16636. You see 16634 now, right? So this is changing, and you want to have and not the intra-candle price, but you want to have the last price. So I would always exclude this row here when you are setting up an intraday database, right? What you can also do, what I don't cover in this video, is you can take this row as long as there is no subsequent row, and when there is a subsequent row, you're replacing the old value with the fixed value, right? Slightly more complicated, but also doable. For now, I'm just excluding this last row here. So that would mean I'm only going until this row here, and I also would need to filter that for the last row. And that's already it for this function. I hope I didn't forget something. Let me quickly check. Should be fine. So let's call this function crypto SQL updater for Bitcoin USDT. And now we have 2 new rows imported to the database. Makes sense. Since I started to set this up, roughly 2 minutes have passed, right? So the last max date is 55 here. If I would execute that again, here you see 0 new rows, but in the next minute I should get a new row. So in this case, you see 1 new row imported into the database, right? So this is pulling very granular new data, is not hammering the API and checks what do you have stored currently in your database. So as I said, you can also extend that so that you set up a table. So the logic is the exact same as above here, right? So if the max date is not existent, where is the function? If the max date is not existent, work with try and except, and then you can set up new tables for new coins, and then you can generate a set of coins and then mass store intraday cryptocurrency data without hammering the API. So I think this video should be very useful, at least I hope. And yeah, I thank you very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you in the upcoming videos. Bye bye.